Welcome back, all of my low-carb friends, and for those of you who are visiting for the first time, welcome. Today's recipe comes by request. One of you lovely subscribers, Penny McBride, asked if I knew how to make a keto-friendly nut brittle. And yes, I do. I do know how to make a keto-friendly nut brittle. So today's recipe is for just that, keto-friendly peanut brittle. You don't have to put peanuts in it if you're not a peanut fan. You can put any kind of nut you want in it. It is so easy and so tasty. And I'm not just going to show you how to make peanut brittle today. I'm also going to show you how to make a chewy caramel peanut cluster candy that is so easy. It's made all in the microwave. So easy and so good. And that's not all. I'm also going to show you how to make a really quick keto corn syrup substitute that I use in this caramel cluster recipe, and you can use in any recipe that requires corn syrup. So if you want printable versions of these, you can check out my website at janetsdeliciouslowcarbkitchen.com. You can find printable versions of these and other goodies there for you. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, right next to the subscribe button, there's a little notification bell. Make sure you click that notification bell. That way you can be notified every time I put out a new video. And while you do that, let's get cooking. Line a large baking sheet with parchment paper. Lightly spray the parchment paper with cooking spray so that the peanut brittle will not stick. Set the baking sheet aside. Place a saucepan on your stove and turn the heat to medium. Then add 2 tablespoons of butter and allow the butter to melt completely. Add 1 cup of granulated swerve or granulated sweetener of your choice and stir it until all the swerve is moistened. Add a ½ teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Be careful when you add these, it can sizzle up a little bit. Then stir continuously over medium heat until the swerve is completely dissolved and the mixture comes to a very low boil. Do not let this come to a complete boil. As soon as you start seeing a little bit of bubbles, you take it off the heat. But make sure that your swerve or whatever sweetener you're using, that it is fully dissolved. Otherwise, you're going to have grainy peanut brittle. Turn off the heat and leave the saucepan on the warm burner. Then add 1 cup of unsalted peanuts and stir until the peanuts are fully combined. Again, make sure that your mixture is not bubbling at all. When you turn the heat off, your burner is still going to be warm. So if your mixture is bubbling at all, make sure you lift it completely off the heat until it stops bubbling. And make sure you stir it constantly so you don't scorch the bottom. Otherwise, your peanut brittle is going to taste burnt. As soon as the peanuts are coated, immediately pour the mixture out onto your prepared baking sheet and use a spatula if needed to spread the mixture into an even layer. It'll spread out pretty much by itself, but you do want to make sure that it is in an even layer. That way everything firms up properly and you don't have one piece that's hard and another piece that's chewy. So make sure you get it as even as possible and work quickly because you don't want it to start getting super sticky. Once it's in an even layer, place it in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes or until it's solid. Once it's completely solid, break it into the desired pieces. You can eat it immediately, or you can store it in an airtight container in your refrigerator until you're ready to eat it. Eat and enjoy. Preheat your oven to 200 degrees. Line a large baking sheet with parchment paper. Grease the lined baking sheet with oil. I like to use oil in this case rather than cooking spray because this gets really sticky. The oil comes out thicker than just a mist that the spray comes out. So I like to use oil, but you can use spray if you want to. Then set the baking sheet aside. In a 2-quart microwave-safe bowl or dish, place a half cup of corn syrup substitute. And make sure you stick around to the end. I'll give you a recipe for the keto corn syrup substitute. And 1 cup of granulated allulose. Stir the sweetener and the corn syrup substitute until it is fully and completely combined. You can try this with other sweeteners, but I have found that in this particular recipe, allulose does the best because allulose dissolves quickly and smoothly and does not make your caramel hard. It makes it nice and soft. So like I said, you can try other sweeteners, but for me, allulose does the best. Now when I'm doing this, I'm using my dark corn syrup substitute because I like that brown sugar taste in it. But if you want to use the light corn syrup substitute, that's fine too. So it's either or, whatever you prefer. Just keep in mind that if you're using my light corn syrup substitute, the caramel may have a slightly lighter color. It will have a slightly different taste because my light corn syrup is made with granulated sweetener, whereas my dark corn syrup is made with brown swerve. So it will have a little bit different taste between the two, but they both still will taste great. So you can use either or. Microwave on high for 2 minutes. Then stir the allulose and the corn syrup substitute to make sure that it is fully combined and that it's not sticking. Then microwave on high for 2 more minutes. Stir in 1 cup of peanuts until the peanuts are fully and completely coated. Then microwave on high for another 3.5 minutes. While this is microwaving for 3.5 minutes, you're going to take your prepared baking sheet and you're going to place it in that 200-degree preheated oven. And this is going to get the baking sheet warm, which makes the caramel spread a lot easier rather than just putting it on a cold baking sheet. If you put it on a cold baking sheet, it can harden immediately. So you want to make sure that baking sheet is warm. That way you can spread the caramel without it getting hard. Once it's microwaved for 3.5 minutes, this will be very hot, so make sure you use gloves or a towel to take this out of the microwave. Stir in 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract until it's fully combined. Then add 1 teaspoon of butter. That is a teaspoon, not a tablespoon. 1 teaspoon of butter and stir it until it's fully combined and completely melted. Then microwave on high for another 1.5 minutes. And as soon as it's done microwaving for 1.5 minutes, immediately add 1 teaspoon of baking soda and stir it completely until it starts getting foamy. Now this foaminess is very important to the texture of your caramel. If it doesn't foam, if you don't have this baking soda, then your caramel is going to be sticky chewy rather than creamy chewy. The baking soda creates air in your caramel, which results in a chewy caramel rather than a sticky caramel. Once the mixture is foamy, immediately pour it into the prepared baking sheet. You should see a lot of air bubbles all throughout the caramel. Then tilt the baking sheet back and forth until the mixture is spread evenly in the baking sheet. You have to work fairly quickly once you add the baking soda. As soon as you see the entire mixture foamy, you want to pour it out immediately, spread it out immediately, and then put it in the fridge for 20 to 30 minutes or until it is firm. So make sure you do work quickly because if you don't, the mixture can harden and then you'll either have hard caramel or you'll have sticky caramel rather than that chewy caramel. You want it to be chewy, but you don't want it to stick so much to your teeth that it doesn't dissolve when you're eating it. So there's a fine line between sticky and chewy. Place it in the refrigerator and let it get firm for about 20 to 30 minutes. Once it's firm, it should still be soft and slightly sticky to the touch, but it should be firm enough that when you lift it off the parchment paper, it comes off in one piece. Then cut the caramel into skinny strips. You may want to spray your knife with cooking spray a little bit, that way it doesn't stick to the caramel and it just slides right through. Make sure your strips aren't too wide. Think the size of a Tootsie Roll, basically, is the size you're looking for, so you don't want it extremely fat. Like I said, just think of the size of a Tootsie Roll. That's kind of what you're going for. Unless you want a fatter piece, that's up to you. But as a general rule, you're kind of thinking of the size of a Tootsie Roll. Once you've cut it into strips, cut each strip into small rectangles. Then cut up some small pieces of parchment paper or wax paper and roll the parchment paper around the rectangles and twist the sides of the parchment paper to create a candy wrapper. Now, while you're cutting these into strips and wrapping them, if the caramel starts getting stretchy while you're cutting it, then put it back in the refrigerator for about another 30 minutes until it gets firm again, and bring it back out and then start cutting it again. Once the caramel gets heated, it can start to melt a little bit, so it'll get that stretchiness. So if it does get stretchy, then just place it back into the refrigerator, like I said, for another 30 minutes, let it get firm again, then continue cutting and shaping it. Once it's all cut in shape and has the paper wrapped around it, then place it in an airtight container and store it in the refrigerator until you're ready to eat it. Eat and enjoy. In a small bowl, combine 1/3 cup of brown swerve, 1/3 cup of monk fruit sweetener or granulated sweetener of your choice. I'm actually using allulose in this particular recipe. Allulose dissolves really quick and really smooth. So if you're going to be using this corn syrup substitute for something that requires extra smoothness, like my caramel recipe, then allulose is the best sweetener for this corn syrup substitute. If you're using the corn syrup substitute in a recipe that's not something that's super chewy or super creamy, then any sweetener will work, because I have used monk fruit sweetener in this and it does just fine. Allulose is the best way to go because it dissolves the best, in my opinion. But of course, as I said, any sweetener will work. A 1/2 teaspoon of xanthan gum and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Whisk these together until they're fully combined and there are no lumps in the brown swerve. You might need to get your fingers in there and break up the brown swerve a bit. Sometimes brown swerve can be a little sticky and stick together, so really make sure that you whisk it well, and if needed, get in there with your fingers and break up any lumps. You don't want any big lumps. Now, the brown swerve that's in this will give the syrup more of a golden color, and you'll have a little bit of that brown sugar flavor in whatever recipe that you use this syrup in. I particularly like it for the majority of my recipes that I use this in, but if you don't want that brown sugar taste, or you just need a light colored syrup instead of a dark colored syrup, then you can substitute the brown swerve for more monk fruit sweetener or more granulated sweetener of your choice. If you do that though, you need to whisk in a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar or a teaspoon of lemon juice when you add your water. This is because you need some type of acid agent in there to keep your syrup from crystallizing. If you don't have an acid agent in there, 9 times out of 10 your syrup is going to crystallize. So you need some type of acid agent. If you have the brown swerve in it, brown swerve already has acid in it from the fruit juices and fruit extracts that they use in it. So it already has an acid content in it, so you don't have to add any extra. But if you are going to leave it out and substitute it for more granulated sweetener, then you do need an acid agent. So either whisk in a 1/4 teaspoon cream of tartar with your dry ingredients here, or add a teaspoon of lemon juice when you add your water. Once you've whisked that all together and gotten all the lumps out, in a medium saucepan, Pour 1 cup of water and bring the water to a low boil over medium-low heat. Now, if you're using the 1 teaspoon of lemon juice for your acid agent, then this is when you would add it. You would add it in with your water and let it come to a low boil. Once the water is just starting to barely bubble, reduce the heat to low and gradually add the bowl with the sweetener in it in small amounts, a little at a time. You do not want to pour the entire thing in there at once because the xanthan gum can seize up on you and it's harder for the sweetener to dissolve when you put it in all in at once. So just sprinkle it in a little bit at a time, whisk it continually while you're adding it. Add a little bit at a time, whisk it up until the sweetener dissolves, then add a little bit more, whisk it until it dissolves, until all of your sweetener has been combined into the water and is fully dissolved. Once the sweetener mix is added and it's fully dissolved, then bring the mixture back up to a low boil. Make sure you're stirring continuously. Once it's come to a low boil, keep stirring continuously and let the mixture simmer for about 1 to 3 minutes or until everything is smooth and the syrup has slightly thickened. It will thicken a little bit more as it cools, but you do want it to have some thickness here. When you pour it off of a spoon, you want it to slowly pour off in a line rather than drips. If you need to, while you're whisking it, if you see any of the sweetener along the sides of your pan, then just slightly dampen a pastry brush and brush along the sides of the pan so that any sweetener can be dissolved. You don't want to have any granules at all because if you have granules, that will make your syrup crystallize. So make sure that it is completely granule free. Also, you want to make sure that this mixture never comes to a full rolling boil. It's really easy to scorch this, so you only want this to lightly simmer. If it does start coming to a full boil, then just raise it slightly from off the heat and keep stirring it until the bubbles go down. Once the bubbles go down, then put it back on the heat and continue to stir it for those 1 to 3 minutes. The longer you cook it, the thicker the syrup will be. Once it's thickened, remove it from the heat. If you want to, you can add up to a ½ teaspoon of vanilla if you want a little bit more flavor. I do this depending on what I'm using the recipe for. If I'm using it for like pancake syrup, then I'll add it. If I'm using it as a corn syrup substitute, then usually I leave it out because usually it's sweet enough just as it is if I'm using it as a corn syrup substitute. Let it cool in the pan for about 30 minutes or until it comes up to room temperature. Once it is room temperature, you can use it immediately or pour it into a mason jar or airtight container and let it cool completely. Then seal it and you can keep it at room temperature for up to 1 month. If for some reason it does crystallize after it has been stored, then just pop it in the microwave for a couple seconds, just enough to get it warm again to be able to dissolve the crystals. But if you have that acid agent, it shouldn't crystallize.
And those are our recipes of the day. I hope you enjoyed them all. If you did and you want to see more videos like this, then make sure you click that thumbs up like button, click that subscribe button, leave me a comment if you want to. Let me know if there's any recipes that you'd like to learn how to make, and I'll do what I can to get those out there for you. And as always, keep cooking.